I'm Claire Parker.
And I'm Ashley Hamilton. And this is Celebrity Memoir Book Club, the podcast where we read celebrity memoirs and the books of, just generally prominent people who could loosely be considered celebrities so that you don't have to.
It takes a village to raise a celebrity. And finally, we're looking deeper into the well of that village, the motherhood.
The motherhood.
The matriarch.
The matriarchs of the whole village.
And Ashley.
Yes, Claire?
If you were to recommend something from your week last week, what would you be recommending to the team?
Okay, there is a podcast I've been listening to. I've been really on a podcast kick lately.
Podcasts, are they any good? You think they have any staying power?
Yeah, I think some people have been tuning into these it's like a little voice in your head just for you talking about stuff. There's this podcast called Song Exploder, and I'm going to see MJ Lunderman tonight, a musician that was on this podcast where they just do a deep dive into a song that they wrote. They interview different musicians about it. I love hearing a song exploded, it turns out.
Not me. I want everything intact. I famously hate bombs.
I love bombs. I say, give me the shrapnel of that tune.
And who does the podcast?
I actually don't know.
Okay. Is there a host or people are just coming on and talking willy-nilly?
No,
freestyle?
There's definitely a host. There's definitely an interviewer. And I think they're doing a really good job for me to listen to the people that I like talk.
Excellent. That's a lost skill. The skill of the interview where you let the interviewee be more important.
No, actually...
I'm not kidding.
Me either. It really is. I don't want to hear your little bits and your jokes. Okay, can I tell you something that's been infuriating me lately? Sometimes when I see a comedian that I really admire, a clip of them on a podcast and the host is trying to riff with them, instead of being why did you go on that podcast? I'm how dare that host try to riff back to you? I saw Robbie Hoffman on Josh Peck's podcast. And he was trying to keep
Peck
up.
Never had a chance with you. No offense.
It was insane. I was like, Josh Peck, you shut your fucking mouth and just let her talk.
Well, I actually feel a lot of compassion and empathy because I see Caleb Heron do press sometimes. And I'm like, you got to put him on his own circuit because no one can keep up. And he makes everybody else look like a fucking idiot. I know you can't he has to have a solo pod.
I've seen it with Caleb Heron before where someone's just trying to keep up with him. And I'm like, stop
You have
that.
to. Sometimes you just have to sit and spectate.
Lisa Traeger, recently I saw a clip of her talking to someone and I was like, shut your mouth. Just let Lisa go.
Don't interrupt. Something's happening.
You're ruining it. Claire, what do you recommend this week?
Oh my God, our own podcast. Speaking of podcasts.
Because you need a podcast to listen to.
Have you heard of Celebrity Memoir Book Club? No, because of Memoir Madness, I've been having to go into the archives and re-listen to the episodes to see where we were at with the people. And I recently re-listened to Matthew McConaughey, who went head-to-head with Will Smith, most recently in San Francisco. Will Smith won. But as Matthew McConaughey would say, and I won. It was very sweet to listen to because in this episode, you're turning 30 and I'm about to quit my job. And I was like, wow, how far we've come, 4 years in the making. And in the Matthew McConaughey episode, he has this moment where he goes to Africa and he wrestles the local legend wrestler and he loses, but he goes, I was a winner. He goes, the other guy won the match, literally, but he goes, I was a winner.
For trying
and getting in. We were both winners. And I have to say, in the way that Matthew McConaughey really changed my life 4 years ago, I was like, I have to reread this book and let him change me again. Because this weekend I ran the half marathon that I've been training for. Mm-hmm. I finished, I ran the whole thing, but I was a little bit disappointed in my time. It was the slowest long run I'd ever. It was of all the runs to be your slowest, it was a kind of bummer. And it sucked because I finished and I was just so disappointed. And it sucks to run for 2 hours, honestly, and then be not good enough. And also it's weird because most things in life I feel like you can try the next day. And I'm like, I don't know, when am I even going to try this thing again? So I was bummed and I was feeling really down on myself, which was silly because I had my friends and my family came out to support me and it was so nice. And literally, who cares? Nothing in my life. I'm not a professional. Nobody's taking away my Nike sponsorship now. And so I kept trying to be like, Claire, hone Matthew McConaughey. Stop calling yourself a loser. You're a winner the way he's a winner. Losers could be winners too. You just say it.
I mean, 2 years ago, you didn't even show up.
2 years ago, I didn't even and you know what I was trying to say? It was just a really hard run. It was one of those things where right out the gate, I was like, I don't feel good doing this. And then I've been doing these long runs and by sometimes mile 4, 5, 6, your body just kind of gives up and they're like, well, I guess we're doing this now. And I was 4, 5, 6, I still felt pretty bad. It felt bad from minute 1 to the last minute. From mile 1 to mile 13, it felt like shit. But I said, Claire, you're actually more of a winner for running so shitty.
Yeah.
Because
Because some people quit.
Well, it would have been very easy to have a good run. If I had run really fast and felt really great and been really strong, that's pretty easy to do.
It's easy to keep going when you're having fun.
It's much harder to be so slow and miserable and feel so painful and shitty the entire time. And I was like, in that way, you're a winner like Matthew McConaughey. And so I have to say, if you're looking for a real attitude and perspective adjuster, Matthew McConaughey. My new thing is I'm saying I'm proud of myself, but I'm disappointed in the outcome. But those are two different things.
Yeah.
I haven't really believed it yet, but I'm saying it. I'm saying it to the mirror, and I think Matthew McConaughey already believes it.
Can I say that's how things come true, is you just keep saying them until randomly they're true.
Also, Matthew McConaughey would even be disappointed in the outcome. I regret his book. Multiple times he lost at stuff and just said he won, and that's his truth. So you know what? I actually ran so fast, and I'm such a winner, and I love life.
And that's the truth.
And that's my new truth. What are you going to do? Look at the stats and tell me I'm wrong? Shut the fuck up.
Exactly. And you know who's the real winner?
I mean, Beyonce. No, I guess Tina Knowles.
For creating the realest winner.
I guess Blue Ivy.
That's so true.
I guess no, who literally won?
Who?
Sir.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine getting to be the Robert Kardashian of the Knowles-Carters.
I mean, when Tina's talking about Sir, she's just like, he loves reading. And I was like, and I hope he reads every day for the rest of his life.
And here's what I wish for Sir. I wish that he just takes his fortunes and becomes addicted to like rare book collecting.
Yes.
And has like the most incredible rare book collection in the whole world and opens it up to the public and like maybe takes it around the world and like he gets really into literacy.
That would be like the most important thing because as public funding seeps away from it, we need like
Sir Knowles-Carter is like the new education department.
The keeper of the books.
The giver. He's the giver. That's the future of America. You work really hard so your child could be a pop star so that her child can be the giver. Oh, I will say, this morning I was watching clips from Cowboy Carter tour.
Oh, we're going to go.
We're going to go. And okay, when she sings Protector, she's holding Rumi. She's just like waving. The smile on her face. I really was like, Beyonce, how are you not bawling? You're the most professional woman in the world. It was really like taking me down.
Wow. I'm really excited to see it. I'm excited that I haven't really seen clips yet because I want to be surprised. I want to be excited. I saw some of my friends went in LA and I said, don't show me.
Don't tell me.
Don't tell me what happens.
Anyway, should we get into the story of Tina Knowles?
We should. The first thing I want to say is that I love the cover art and the like interior.
I was literally thinking I would love this as wallpaper.
This is the most beautiful design I've ever seen in my life.
Kalani Fatai Oladimaji is the painter.
I mean, I love this painting so much. So this book is split into 3 parts: daughter, mother, and woman. So the first section, as a daughter, she opens up with her childhood, growing up in Galveston. She calls herself Badass Teeny B. So she was born Celestine and Beyoncé. So all of her siblings had their last name spelled differently because the hospital kept writing it differently on their birth certificates. And after the mom corrected them once, they just like would never listen to her.
Well, they were like very racist. And basically like, you're lucky to get a birth certificate at all. So she was just like, I can't protest because I don't want to risk my children not having birth certificates. So every single one of her siblings has a differently spelled last name.
Yes.
But I guess it's all pronounced Beyonce.
Mm-hmm.
So she was born in 1954. And her mother was 44 years when she was born. She was the youngest of 7 children. She grew up with quite elderly parents. At the time, 44 was not the young whippersnapper new mom age it is now.
And her mom had actually had 2 kids with a previous husband when she was very young and then took a very long break from having kids. So she had an older sister who was, I think, 20-something years older than her. Mm-hmm. And that sister had 7 or 8 children by the time she was 30. So those children were all her age.
And they all grew up in Galveston, Texas. And they were definitely very poor. But she's like, I don't know. I didn't know we were poor because I grew up and there was always something to eat. And I always had a friend to play with. And she was just surrounded by a lot of love and family and like built-in friendships. Her house was always the hang house. They had a backyard with a swing. At the time, she thought it was ginormous. She laughs because she goes back now and she was like, well, for us, it was big, but it isn't technically big. But she just had a really fun childhood. She said, God had given my mother the most cautious woman I would ever know, a girl without fear. Or my mom might have said any sense. Mm-hmm. So badass Teeny B was a good fit.
So her nephew, Johnny, is 4 years older than her. That's her sister's son. That's her best friend.
And they would just do like wild things. She said that he called her Lucy after I Love Lucy because she was always climbing up trees and getting in trouble and jumping into the ocean.
I mean, they would just light shit on fire.
Yeah. She was just really interested in what would happen if you like made a bigger and bigger fire. I feel like she's very typical youngest kid, doing what you can to get attention, acting out. There's a little bit less attention being paid to you because your parents are older and they're busy. You're just running free. From my first breath, I was told, shown, and embraced into knowing that it is an honor to be a Black person. My mother saw to that, making sure I carry all these mothers with me.
Her mom would always tell her these stories outside, and she loved just listening to the stories, the history of her family. But she had an impulse to see what was outside Galveston. So it was just very the norm to stick around. Everyone would just get married right out of high school and start their family next door. And she knew that she wanted to leave town and try something bigger.
So her best friend, Johnny, who was a few years older than her, was obviously gay by the time he was 3, they say. And I had never known him to hide that light. Selena, his mother, filled him with such love and had him so confident that he never hid who he was. But he would be called things, and adult strangers would sometimes eavesdrop on our conversations and grimace at his freedom or raise an eyebrow at his loud, free laugh. They would shoot him a look, menacing and judgmental, and I would give it back magnified. Johnny, I guess, was pretty obviously gay growing up, and the family didn't really have a problem with it, but by the time he got to middle school, the adults were worried about how he would be treated. So the fathers tried to get together and get him to like learn sports, and he rejected that immediately. And the moms all said, what we're going to do is teach him a craft. Tina's mother, Agnes, was an incredible seamstress and actually mostly supported the family on her seamstress work. And so she taught Johnny how to sew. And because he was such an incredible sewer, he was given this like superpower that earned him money and freedom. Like all of the kids at school would come to him and ask him to make them like really cool outfits and clothes. And he was able to make money and he was able to like buy protection in that way. Tina kind of internalized this as like the way that you earn your freedom and your allowance to be yourself is to find something you can barter with. That she felt that that was something her mom had learned, that it's so important to always have a way to support yourself. And so I think now she sees that as maybe like the first step in her becoming kind of a, I don't want to say people pleaser, but like sacrificing herself as a mother and as a daughter. But I also don't think that's bad advice for anybody. Find something you're good at because it'll, especially for women, like find a way that you can support yourself because then you can rely on yourself.
Yeah. She considers Galveston fairly progressive, but she knows how much racism there was. She just felt very protected from it for a really long time. Like she would be on the bus with her sister and her sister would pull her to the back and she didn't know why.
Mm-hmm. And she never really understood why her mother was so protective and so cautious. And as she got older, of course, and she saw the racism for herself, she started to begin to understand like why there were such strict rules and see how unfair it was. Her father, she loved so much, but he was a weekend alcoholic and Saturdays were the worst. He would go out and spend a good portion of his money drinking. She said he was sober Monday through Friday, but then he would go out and come home late and wake up the family. And her mom would always yell at the dad. And she really was more mad at her mom than the dad and being like, well, it's his money. He's allowed to use it how he wants. And why don't you stop him from doing it? Like everything was kind of put on her mother. And so she really blamed her mother more than her father, which of course as an adult, I think she looks back and goes, of course it wasn't my mom's fault.
So because her mom did such a good job of protecting her father, and her mom, she now realizes was their primary breadwinner, but she like really let the dad be the man of the house. But he was injured from a salt mine accident when he was a bit younger. So he grew up on Weeks Island, which was an area that was just owned and completely operated by a couple of companies that bought out this land.
It had been a plantation, like a particularly gruesome plantation because it was an island. So they like put a lot of energy into keeping people trapped there.
And then after they were free, they discovered the salt mines, first of all, and then it became owned by a couple of private companies where everyone that worked there had to be a part of this industry, essentially, because that's all that was there, and it was an island.
And the predominantly Black workers were given almost no safety or protection. So one of the rules of the salt mine was that if there was an explosion, you don't go back for men. And this was actually true of both white and Black people, but of course, it was often the Black workers who were given the more dangerous tasks, so it predominantly affected them. But her father and all of his brothers worked at the salt mine. He was the youngest kid. He went in there. There was an explosion. He got trapped. They refused to go back for him. So his brothers in the middle of the night snuck back in, used equipment and dug him out and found him and the other guy and got them to safety. They got him to the hospital. And then they were arrested then and there. The owners of the salt mine showed up with police and arrested them
for trespassing.
However, once they had fired all the brothers, they realized that they had lost like a good amount of their more experienced workers. So they brought on some of the brothers, which created a division in the family. Meanwhile, union leaders were going to the younger brothers and saying, you know, if you had been in a union, you would have had protections. by taking this conversation at all, by meeting with these union leaders, they were just put in immediate danger. Somebody bombed their house and they were told, if you stay here till the morning, you will be killed. So his family had to leave in the dead of night with nothing. And they ran to Galveston.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, Tina's mother, Agnes, was actually also from Weeks Island. And she was very beautiful. When she was like 16, 17 years old, one of the cute boys in town, Slack, he picked her up off her feet, married that lady, and took her out to Galveston. They had a child, Slack Jr. Unfortunately, it turned out Agnes was not the chef or the wife he thought he was going to get. I mean, she was just a 17-year-old girl. And he was very frustrated with her lack of cooking, lack of homemaking. I mean, she was a teenager with a newborn.
I mean, it became a very toxic relationship. They ended up having a second child, a daughter named Selena.
And it did not get better. And I think maybe toxic could be underplayed. You know what I mean? I think it was like almost an abusive relationship because it got so bad, she had to run away.
Destructive physically and mentally.
She took the baby, went back to Weeks Island, but he would not let her take the older child. And he got immediately a new girlfriend who was like raising that baby. So she goes back to Weeks Island where before the salt mine explosion, she meets Loomis, who hits on her, loves her, and agrees to raise her children like his own. So they're living together. They're married.
She ends up getting both of the kids back.
And when the salt mine explosion happens and then the bombing happens because of the union busting, they were like, well, we have to get out of her right now. Our lives are at stake. So in the middle of the night, they have to get in the car and they run. And she doesn't know where to go to except for her ex-husband's house. They have not spoken in a year. And she is showing up to his door with a new husband. By the grace of mercy and God, she was able to find it in her heart to ask for help. And luckily, he, I think, felt guilty enough about what he had done to the mother of his children to let her in. And he made it clear that they could stay there as long as they needed. And so
they stayed for a couple of weeks while the dad...
I think a couple months.
He ended up helping the dad get a job.
Loomis, in a union as a longshore worker, which was huge. You're not supposed to be able to just move to town and get a job like that. So it was quite a kind thing that he was able to do after years of being a horrible husband. She's like, I think he was just really grateful that Loomis had raised his children like his own. Like he had been raising Slack's kids, essentially.
And then for the rest of their lives, they ended up being this very cordial, extended family where, I mean, they would be sitting at church, Agnes and her ex-husband and her current husband and like all of the children.
And Loomis, Tina's father, raised Agnes's two older children as his own his whole life. They called him father. They didn't have much to do with Slack Sr., but even in his obituary, like it was never mentioned that they were not his biological children. He raised them wholly his own.
Mm-hmm.
However, because of what had happened at the salt mine, he lost vision in one eye and he lost hearing in one ear. Because of the union laws, he was never permitted to do full longshoreman work, which was like one of the better jobs you could have as a Black person in Galveston. It was well paid, but he could only handle like smaller loads because he was considered disabled. And so even though he did have this like secure union job, he was making much less money than other people who had the same job.
Yeah, he was only working a couple days a week.
Because there just weren't that many small loads for him to carry.
The rest of Loomis's brothers stayed at Weeks Island, so his whole family was there and they would go every now and again.
But it is so interesting because Tina is so much younger than the oldest two children. By the time she was born, it was like there was this whole extended family that they had already built in Galveston. So she did not grow up with this sense of like, oh, we lived far away from my family. She grew up with cousins and brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews all around her.
Mm-hmm. Because Selena was like 20 years older than her.
Mm-hmm.
She lived like around the corner with her 7 children. Anyway.
Tina's traumas really start when she goes to Catholic school, which is hard to hear on the edge of the Pope. And I feel like this is the problem.
This is not what the Pope wanted.
This is not what the Pope wanted, but this is the problem with Catholicism is like protect the children. And then how many people have stories about going to Catholic school and just getting their shit rocked by a fucking nun? Just getting their asses beat by a lady who can't even fuck. Like, you
all of them.
Imagine being like, I gave up the right to fuck so I could hit someone else's kids. Come on.
That's exactly it.
Come on.
That's exactly what they picked. So they're so mean to her, the nuns.
There was like a middle class Black community in Galveston, and that is who mostly sent their children to this private Catholic school.
Her family was poor, but her dad worked for the church.
And her mom.
They bartered basically for their children's tuition because they wanted these kids to have a great education. Unfortunately, the nuns were so mean to them because of this.
It was her and this other little boy, and they really like picked on them for being poorer.
Sister said plainly, you don't belong here.
So from the beginning, poor little Tina is just getting beat by these nuns and being made to feel so ashamed and being told she's too vain and she thinks she's so cute and she's so awful and you'll never get to be the Virgin Mary in a play, and that she made her mom make her this beautiful white dress because they're like, go get a white dress for Virgin Mary. And then they show up and they go, we're actually letting another girl do it.
Well, they like wanted her to get her mom to make a dress for this other girl. They just didn't tell her that's what it was for. And she was constantly getting her hopes up, and she was constantly just like running away from school because she lived across the street. So she would just run home and be like, Mom, this is fucked. And her mom would be like, no, it's go back to school.
Yeah, I mean, it was more than that. She was like, come home and plead and beg and say, don't make me go back there. They're beating me, and expecting her mom to stand up for her. And her mom would always say, you have to go back.
And it really drove a wedge between her and her mom because she felt that her mom was never standing up for her.
Her mom was so Catholic. She would go to mass every single day, but because she was divorced, she was never allowed to take communion. Meanwhile, I don't know if it was like a woman-only thing because it seems like her ex-husband was taking communion every day.
I think it's a woman thing.
See, this is why people hate the Catholics.
Her older sister, Flo, who was her next oldest sister, was very politically involved and was constantly going to sit-ins.
And her mom, Agnes, would always try to stop Flo because she was always worried about the blowback and what could happen to Flo. And Flo was about 10 years older than Tina. And Agnes's way of slowing Flo down was saying, sure, you could go into town, but you have to bring your 6-year-old sister. And because of this, Tina was exposed to a lot of political activism by her older sister. She was going to sit-ins. And once she saw her sister almost get arrested, and she was like, I was 6 years old and I was begging to not let them. And she really started to see the racism in her city. What I recall comes to me now in flashes. I remember the cops being there and them taking one of the girls we came with. I saw about 10 kids on the ground, handcuffed with their hands behind their backs. Some were sitting, some were lying down.
Finally, she gets her mom to let her change schools. She says, I'm just going to keep running away. And so then she got to go to public school. Her mom was in the hospital the day that she was supposed to go enroll, so her brothers took her to enroll in school, and she convinced them to change her name from Celestine to Tina.
She hated that name, Celestine. Her mom was intermittently in the hospital like every 6 months, it seems. It seems her whole life, or as long as Tina was alive, her mother has always been sickly, and her father. So that is like a big part of her, that she was kind of born into this caretaker role. And the idea that the youngest daughter, it's her job, especially if she's unmarried, to come take care of her parents. So from the time she was very young, it seems she was like acutely aware that like
her job was taking care of them
and how fragile her parents' lives were. So she gets to go to this public school, and for whatever reason, they put her in like the D class, which is like the class for the slowest children. And she had been going to this Catholic school with like much better books and a better education. And so she's running circles around all these kids. And this teacher gives her a note one day to bring to another teacher. And it says, as much of a delight as this child Tina is to have in my class, she is running circles around these kids. She needs to be in an A or B group. Can you take her on? That note and that yes changed my life. Not because I joined Miss Barrow's B class or was sent to some academic trajectory that I might have missed. My life was changed because sitting in the middle of that classroom was Vernell Jackson. That was her best friend. And of course, that's what she's talking about now. But I do think she talks a lot about the way that having one teacher tell you that you're good enough and that they believe in you can really change a child's life. And like how you can see a child just blossom with just one adult giving them permission to be themselves.
She's extremely passionate about mentorship, and she's like acutely aware of how much information people will never receive if like an older person doesn't step out of their way to introduce you to it, like especially with arts.
Around 5th grade, she finds out that the reason her father always makes a big joking show at his birthday of throwing away the card and just taking the money as the gift is because he actually can't read. She had been getting her feelings hurt because she had been writing him all these like heartfelt notes about how much she loved him as a father. And she didn't understand why he wouldn't take time to read the cards. And finally her older sister goes, because he can't read. I think that was a huge shock for her. That really like opened her eyes up to the situation that she was born into.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when you're in such a small town, you don't really know. You have nothing to compare it to. What she lived was all she knew.
So she has an older brother who is a very promising athlete, and he's brought over to an integrated school to play sports. They're very worried about him, but there's this act where the schools have been integrated, but it's kind of up to each individual to like enroll in a different school.
So a lot of these white schools, the only reason they would like kind of court a black student was if they were a great athlete. That tended to be who was getting poached. And there was this sense of like, well, should you go or should you stay? And he was like, well, they have better books. They have better opportunities. I'm going to go.
Yeah. And because he was an athlete, he didn't have that many problems at school because he was there in like a revered position. But then one day he was at a party and he was drugged by the other students. Like he didn't want to drink at the party, but they kind of roofied him. And he like fell asleep on the wrong person's porch. they didn't realize who it was. So it was actually a neighbor they knew.
Yeah, an older woman who thought it was just like a white guy who had come from a neighboring resort, because Galveston can be a resort town, and like passed out on her couch. So she calls the cops and says, there's a white guy on my porch.
Then she realizes it's Skip. So she's like, oh no, never mind. I fucked up. It's Skippy.
The cops are already there and they're like, well, that's a black guy. And they go to arrest him and they provoke him. You know, I mean, they like are immediately violent in such a way to like startle and upset him. They then use that as an excuse for why they get to arrest him. The whole family runs to the police station to bail him out, and he doesn't show up for hours. And it turns out they had taken him down to the beach and just attacked him. And from that day on, the police like really targeted Tina's family. And she's like, I don't know if it's because they had no real reason to arrest my brother, and so they were mad or what, but they just like could not stop being harassed by the police.
So they're constantly, you know, pulling the dad over, arresting Skip whenever they can. The whole family becomes a target. At one point, Tina gets arrested.
Yeah, for just like walking home from the movies. And she's like, it was a real watershed moment in my family where like I could see my mom, my dad, and my brother, everybody changed after that night. It like changed the trajectory of my brother's life because he was never able to be the same again.
She creates a singing group with her friends. She starts getting really passionate about singing. So she creates a group called the Veltones. They were very known for being stylish, cool gals. There's like a little bit of shuffling in the lineup of the Veltones, but they start getting kind of well known around town. They're brought to sing at a lot of events. But then as they get a little bit older, the other girls are just like, no, we're going to go hang out with our boyfriends.
They were boy crazy. The gals were all boy crazy. Meanwhile, Tina had said, there was one afternoon at rehearsal that I realized I had found my passion. I wanted to be an entertainer for the rest of my life. I was too shy to tell anyone else that I'd even had aspirations or anything. Certainly never said that's what I'm going to be, but it spoke it to the girls. We're going to be discovered and get a record deal.
And then speaking of mentorship, one time Lydia, who is her older brother's girlfriend, takes her to see the Alvin Ailey dance troupe. It like blows her mind. She's never seen anything like it.
Because Alvin Ailey had been from Texas, and she was like, wow, the fact that he was able to take who he is, it's like he wasn't successful in spite of being from Texas or where he grew up or who he was. She was like, he took that and he used that to become somebody who was able to really move her. She was so moved by that choreography. And I think it really woke her up. And to this day, she thanks Lydia for the exposure that like allowed her to see who she wanted to be.
So she has these dreams of getting a record deal and getting discovered. Meanwhile, the voices around her are very like, well, maybe someday if you finish high school, like you could get a job. And she's like, what do you mean if I finish high school? If I like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, you're pretty, so you'll probably just get married out of high school and maybe not even finish. And those are the expectations of her at the time. So then the Black high school closes and she's forced to go to Ball High, which is where her brother went. It was a predominantly white school. And when the school is integrated, because it was originally the white school, that is what it was, that the Black kids were also just at. So the cheerleading squad was already set. All of these things were already kind of locked. All the activities were what they were. And there wasn't like a re-auditioning process. It was just like, if there was space for one particular Black kid, maybe they would get an opportunity, but no one else really did. So she wasn't going to be able to be a majorette like her sister. She just had a really horrible time for a couple of years. She had the really bad stomach problem. And she went to the doctor and they kept on insisting that she was pregnant. And at that point, she was a virgin. So she kept being like, I definitely am not. And no one believed her, especially her mom, or including her mom. But to her, it was especially her mom. The fact that her mom didn't believe that she couldn't be pregnant, it just like shut a door on their relationship for the next several years.
Right then and there, a wall closed between me and my mother. I had been violated, but her immediate assumption was that I had been lying to her about sex. It also turned out that not only had they violated her by giving her this vaginal exam without explaining it or her consent, and they had torn her hymen, but also she did in fact have hepatitis. And she like needed actual medical attention that she had been denied. I was more determined now. In 3 years, when I was a senior, I would graduate and leave Galveston. I would leave her. So she really is like, I have to get out of here. She feels the pull to Galveston doesn't come from anything within her, but this external idea of guilt and responsibility for taking care of her parents.
She gets really involved with the gay scene in Galveston because she wants her friend / cousin, Johnny, to get a boyfriend. So she talks to this kid at school and she's like, where do you guys hang out? And she finds this gay club that's like very under the radar. And she and Johnny kind of become this duo doing like hair and makeup and designing outfits for drag queens. And that kind of sparks her interest in doing hair and makeup. I mean, she already had an interest in it, but it really is like her first real experience of like making people feel beautiful and loving that feeling.
It also helped her tie up like the final loose end of what would allow her to leave Galveston, because she was already mad at her mom. So she was able to be like, okay, I can't stand here with my parents. But her one person she was worried about leaving behind was Johnny, because like as a gay guy in Galveston, Texas in the 60s, he didn't have a huge community. And she found him this like underground gay club where he immediately went in and came alive, and they met all these drag queens. And then once she saw that he had friends and he had a community that he could lean on, she was like, okay, it's time for me to get out of here.
This was joy Black queer joy claimed, not for survival or resilience or even defiance, but for the fullness of joy.
This summer, she was also arrested by the police for no reason. She was just walking home from a movie, and they took her downtown, and they accused her essentially of being a sex worker. And they're like, well, what were you doing on the corner? And she was like walking from point A to point B. Her family came and bailed her out. But it became kind of almost a final straw. Like they were like, how much more can we harass in this town? Eventually, I think after a couple more parking tickets and maybe her other brother being arrested for no reason, someone in their family was the chauffeur of a lawyer. And they went to the lawyer and they're like, can you help us? And he called the police station. And they don't know what he said on the phone, but the cops left them alone after that.
So now she has a plan to move out to Los Angeles, and she spends the summer after she graduates high school working to save up enough money for a plane ticket to get out there. And then two of her cousins who had been staying with her aunt Linda in San Diego. So Linda had left her husband in Houston to move to San Diego. There wasn't really any conversation about what any of that meant. Was Linda divorced? That's not important. What matters is she's living in San Diego. Two of the cousins are living out there with her. They drive back to Galveston for the weekend. And then they're like, oh, Teeny, like, what are you up to? And she's like, I'm planning to move out to LA. And they're like, well, why not just drive with us back to San Diego? And so she moves up her plan. She's like, well, I guess I'm moving tomorrow. And she hops in the car with them and heads out to live with Linda.
Linda takes her in and is essentially like, you're welcome, be a roommate. She's also working at the time for the National Urban League San Diego office, which focused on economic empowerment as the key to social equality. And so she was like, well, I can't have my own roommate be unemployed if I'm working for this office. So you got to get a job. They help her get a job. They end up having so much fun. They're going out together. They're partying. She like loves the beach. She loves living there. Pretty soon, Linda gets a boyfriend who's a DJ in LA, which I'd say, watch out, Linda. But I don't know what happened to Linda.
So Tina wants to be in LA anyway. And then finally, Linda is like, well, what if we just both move to LA to be closer to my boyfriend? And Tina's like, well, what a good idea.
So she moves to LA and is looking for a job, and she ends up working the Shishido counter. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, the Shishido makeup counter at a department store.
They were just like, well, you're pretty and good at makeup. Would you do makeup? And she's like, yeah. So she starts practicing and she learns. And one of the frequent customers of where she works is Tina Turner. And she is in like the Black Hollywood part of Hollywood, and she's seeing all of her idols. And it really like comes alive for her that she could do anything. She's working in this boutique, and the woman who works there and hires her has this mother that comes in that every single day puts down the boutique owner and then compliments Tina just to make the boutique owner feel bad. And watching this dynamic, Tina calls her mom and is like, I'm so sorry I was mean to you. You were such a good mom. It could have been way worse. And she said right then and there, like the wall between them dissipated and they became very close again.
Yeah, they started talking almost every day. So then Linda moves back to Texas to get back together with her husband, and Tina is kind of out on her ass. But then one of her coworkers from the store is like, oh, why don't you move in with me? So she's in LA for a while longer until her parents both become very sick. And as like the youngest and unmarried daughter, it's kind of her duty to move back and take care of them. I tried to find fun in Galveston, but I kept thinking of my other life in LA. Then she gets invited to come sing with a band, and that kind of revives her for a bit. I loved every second of performing, even if I stayed terrified. It was bittersweet, though, that I realized my singing career was never going to be some big thing.
So after her parents stabilize, she's able to move back to Houston, and there she's reconnecting with friends. Then she goes to this party. His friend from Fisk University, Matthew Knowles, was living in Houston too, and he and some ex-roommates were hosting a house party. Rusty called me and asked if I'd go with him. As friends, I reminded him. As friends, he said.
Everyone there thinks she's dating Rusty, and this guy, Matthew Knowles, comes up to her and is like, oh, you're Rusty's girlfriend? And she's like, no, I'm not. And so she's developed this life in Houston, which is kind of a consolation prize for not being able to get back out to LA. Then her parents get sick again. So she has this kind of long distance correspondence with Matthew Knowles.
Yeah, and she does not like him necessarily. She's like, he's not my type. He's not like a little bad boy. He's not a handsome, sexy little bad boy. And everybody's like, maybe that's good. I will say, beware of the nice guy. Sometimes they're even worse.
He's also very successful.
Yeah, and he does like know how to show respect. So he drives her all the way down to Galveston. He goes into the hospital. He asks her on a date and she's like, I'm busy. And then she actually needs a ride down to Galveston. So she's like, well, you can drive me to Galveston, which is a 3-hour drive. I do think to people in Texas, that's like nothing. I think that's a daily commute.
I think it's a daily commute. I also think it's like, what's more first date than just hanging out for 3 hours?
And when he drives her down, he goes into the hospital to meet the dad. He meets her family. And everybody's like, wow, he's like quite a change from your normal boyfriend and we like him. And she's like, no, he's not my type. He's not my type. But they keep calling each other and they keep laughing. And it's one of those things where slowly but surely the phone keeps ringing and something more develops.
So she ends up marrying Matthew Knowles. She finds out that he's in debt and then he's like, don't even worry about it. I'm working on it. I'll pay that off in 6 months. And then in 6 months, I'm buying us a house. And he does.
That became Matthew's mantra, and I rightly believed him. He always had a vision for the next thing, and he motivated me to think of practical ways to make those dreams, our dreams, real. Unfortunately, the day before the wedding, her father has a heart attack. And then right after, her mom gets sick. And it's like, it becomes this thing where the first few years of their marriage very much revolve around her taking care of the parents. And she is like, Matthew never made me feel bad about it. He was completely understanding when I had to go down and spend all of my time, even like the first day of our honeymoon, taking care of my mom, taking care of my dad. Sometimes my dad would show up unannounced and stay for weeks because he needed a full-time caretaker. She goes, and Matthew was always understanding and never gave me grief. And I was like, wow, what a good guy. And that is definitely the story of Matthew for a few
years,
chapters.
Matthew was brilliant and successful, but the feeling he gave me wasn't about the money. He could have made a fraction of what he did, and I would still feel protected.
He was one of the highest national salesmen for Xerox.
Yeah, he was very successful at Xerox.
They were always getting to go on like these long salesman vacations. I feel like it was the heyday of salesmen.
Yeah, a lot of sales being made. Her mom ends up in critical care, and so she goes to the church, and it's like, you have to let my mom take communion. She's sorry that she got divorced. Please let her. And so the priest goes to the hospital and lets the mom take communion, and she ends up passing away, having like fulfilled her dream of being able to take communion again. And shortly after that, Tina starts feeling a bit nauseous.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out she's pregnant.
So she's only 26 years old. She's lost her mother, which she now says, oh, I realized how young I was to have lost my mother.
Mm-hmm. Not having her mom there for the birth of her first child, for raising her first child, was really hard on her, but she did have her older sisters who were quite a bit older than her and some aunts who were like very involved and there, but it's not a mom. She and Matthew like loved nightlife. They loved going out. They loved partying. They loved dancing. And up until she was 8 months pregnant, she maintained. She was putting on a great outfit and showing up to the club. And then one day when she was 8 months pregnant, she was just like overheating and she unbuttoned her whole dress and was like, oh, okay, I better stay home until I have this baby.
She stopped working when she had the baby, and she says, I missed working, so I put that natural career interest into whatever deals or work dramas Matthew had going on. Our minds were both so good at seeing the whole landscape and figuring out his best course of action. We were a good team, but our favorite subject was the baby on the way.
So they were always singing to the baby. They had this one song called Here I Go Again. That was the song they were always singing when she was pregnant. Maybe that's why we chose the song Nostalgia, or perhaps we were both acknowledging the field of red flags our child would be born into. There were already problems in our marriage that first year. Matthew had an ongoing struggle with fidelity, but the suspicions I had would get washed away by the fact that our love was stronger than a misstep.
So she names the little baby girl who was born 9:04 in the morning, 8 pounds, 7 ounces.
Wait, 9:04 on 9/4? That's amazing. Her timing has never
Impeccable.
not been perfect.
Beyoncé Giselle Knowles. She named her Beyoncé because the last name Beyoncé was going to die with her family because it was all girls with that last name. And so to keep the family name alive, she gave it to her daughter. Her dad, who had never been a softie, she says he like cracked a smile, but didn't give her too much.
Yeah. Giselle is a name that she thought was just like so beautiful.
She said, though, that having this baby so soon after her mother died, her grief hit home when she came home with this baby. And I was trying to imagine it like before the internet. She's alone in Houston. She didn't know who to call when things were going wrong. She wasn't breastfeeding. And she said her breasts like were so swollen and hurt. So she got in a hot shower to help it. And it just got worse. And she just had this feeling of like, I don't know who to call and I don't know how to do this. And that's when she started to really understand how sad she was.
She says Beyoncé looks exactly like her mom, and her siblings all saw it too. Even the way she like holds her fingers, she's like, that's the way my mom would just like put her palms together.
She says she doesn't know if it was postpartum depression or the grief or the combination of both. But after Beyonce was born, she had a really, really hard time. And her depression got so bad that for 3 whole days, she couldn't get out of bed. And one of her cousins had to come and help take care of the baby. And finally, after 3 days, she got out of bed, held her baby, and kind of looked down and just was like, no, I have to get it together. Love is stronger than fear. Holding my baby, singing to her, I vowed just that. I would not let fear dictate her destiny the way I felt my mother, despite her best intentions had done to me. I could love my mother, call upon her strength and memory, and also learn from her what not to do.
You will keep doing the impossible every day, teeny, because that is what mothers do. I would be the mother Beyonce deserved. So Beyonce was not a good sleeper, and it drove everybody fucking insane. Matthew was like, we got to get you out of town. Like, you deserve a break. So she calls and gets her cousin to take care of her because all of her older sisters, she's not even asking them for help. She's like, I'm going to do you the honor of you get to watch my baby for a weekend. And they were like, until you ask nicely, no.
They're like, you think because it's your first baby, it's the first baby that ever existed, but we all have 8 kids. We don't fucking care. We will help you out, but do not act like you're doing us a favor by letting us hold your special baby. In some ways, though. In some ways.
Did you guys know that you turned down a weekend with Beyonce?
They got it, but...
So her dad is extremely sick. So her dad has a really heavy accent and kind of like says his sentences in an interesting order. So most people who refuse to stop and listen to him think he doesn't speak English. So the doctors are always like being very frank in front of him, thinking he doesn't understand them. And really, they're just like scaring the living shit out of him.
By saying he's going to die, he's going to die.
Yeah.
He tells Tina, I'm going to die. And she's like, no, you're not. Like, you're fine. I have to go home and do something. And when she goes back to Houston, he dies that weekend. And that is like a grief that she has had a hard time forgiving herself for.
She's very hard on herself because she's just so there for everyone. And if there's like one blink where she's not and something bad happens, she takes it very personally. He needed me and I had left him. I felt that wound until it became a scar.
So Matthew Knowles did make good on his promise that after he paid off all their debts and he got promoted, he would buy them a house. They bought a big, beautiful house in the 3rd ward, which was like a Black middle-class area with all these big, beautiful homes. There was a lot of like white flight and a lot of people, even Black families, when they would get more money, they would move to the suburbs. And Tina and Matthew were very determined to like be a part of their community and help build it up. So they were like, we're not going to leave the 3rd ward. We're just going to move into these big, beautiful homes. They had a lot of goals and they did it. They had like this gorgeous house that they lived in with Beyonce. Tina loved renovating it and she had a real eye for flair. And she was like decorating all the stained glass windows herself. And she was doing a lot.
And then one night, the boiler catches fire and there's a small fire right by Beyonce's room. And the firefighters got there. They put out the fire. But that night, they have to stay at a hotel. That night, I kept thinking of my mother holding her kids the night of the firebombing at Weeks Island. She was watching her world burn with no one coming to her rescue. I knew what protected us, money, pure and simple, but none of it was mine. What kept me and my daughter safe depended on a marriage I did not have faith in lasting, a man I was not sure of. She mentions his infidelity before, but this is the first time she ever really mentions that she like might not stay, but also what's keeping her there. She realizes that she hasn't been a part of the workforce for a long time. And as Beyonce is going to be going to school soon, she starts looking into maybe starting a career for herself.
So she wants to get her beauty license so that she can do hair professionally. She has been doing her friends' hairs for a while. And she's like, I know I have the talent. I just don't have the license. So she enrolls in the Franklin Beauty School. She's like, I'm 31 years old. I'm older than everybody, but whatever. I can persevere. Her first day, she goes to check on how Beyonce's doing at school, and she looks, and Beyonce has not a friend. And she asks these little girls, why don't you go play with that girl Beyonce? And she's like, nobody likes her. And she's like, right then and there, I was like, I'm out. I can't fucking be in school. I have to go take care of my baby.
At some point, she does end up getting her license, but Beyonce was always just like very shy and really struggled with making friends. And she talks about it a lot.
However, at that same time, Matthew has a sister or a cousin or a niece, somebody in their family with a young daughter who's a little bit older than Beyonce, who's having a hard time. And so they say, why don't you guys come move in with us?
Ebony is the daughter.
And it really helps because Ebony is like Beyonce's age and she's a little bit older and she's much more extroverted. And so now Beyonce has this built-in friend. And Tina also says it's kind of an eye-opener for her because Ebony's mother is a single mother and much younger. So she likes to go out and have some fun too. Ebony's a lot more independent. And she said the first day they had dinner, Ebony like cleared her dishes in the sink. And Beyonce was like, what is she doing? And she's like, I realized now that Beyonce was 5 years old and she didn't know how to dress herself. She would just put her hands in the air. And she was like, it was helpful for us to like live together and build off of each other's parenting skills. But something I really admire about Tina is like the way she takes in other families all the time. She kind of sees her house as like the hearth and the home. And anybody who needs a place to stay is welcome. Like it is very much a community.
She knows they have a lot.
Yeah.
And she's extremely intent to share it as much as she can.
Yeah. And she like really understands the benefit of growing up with cousins and siblings and nieces and nephews. And I think that was like the best part of her childhood. And she really wants to share that.
So then she goes on this vacation with Matthew to Egypt and a couple other countries. And she's like, I'm going to get pregnant on this trip. And she does.
However, the marriage was deteriorating faster than I could possibly find ways or even reasons to make work. Even the pregnancy, Matthew's infidelity became so out there for all to see that I could not possibly stay in the marriage.
Maybe I thought a second baby would fix things, but now this life growing inside me inspired me to move. So while she's pregnant with Solange, she starts making moves to exit the marriage. She decides to start her own salon. So she gets Matthew to put some money in so that she can get a lease on a place.
It's funny because I don't think Matthew knows what the end game is, but she is like using Matthew's business acumen to help her build this business so that she can divorce him.
Yeah. So she starts putting all the pieces in place. She's pregnant and laying the tile in this salon herself. She's making it really cute. She wants it to be like an amazing place for professional Black women to come and network and look great.
And she really has this angle of if you're a mother, if you're a career gal, if you're a career gal mother, you don't have a lot of free time. So you can't go and spend like 5-6 hours just yapping. She's like, we have women that appreciate your time. We're going to get you in, get you out of here for $10.
And they're going to use really high-end stuff. I mean, listen, I was like, this is a great salon.
You get a free glass of champagne. There's also like a big no gossiping rule among the staff. If you're caught gossiping either about your coworkers or the clients, you're fired. And she's like, so I just really created like a place where you are safe. You can relax, but we'll get you in and get you out. We like respect your time and your privacy.
As women rose in society, Black women were constantly scrutinized and held to higher standards. I wanted them to have a place where they could relax and get all the extra pampering they deserved. So she's putting all the finishing touches on the salon. She's planning to have Solange and then 2 months later open the salon in October. Solange is born on June 14th.
Oh my God, the day of our New York show. If you're in New York, you should be coming to our show.
To celebrate Solange. She was sure that Solange was going to be a boy, Matthew Jr. As their marriage was deteriorating, she was definitely planning on Matthew Jr. But then Solange was born, a girl, and in her baby bag, she had this like fun little book of French baby names. And she found the name Solange and was like, gorgeous. Her middle name is Piaget.
And then she was born Solange Piaget. And this was back in the day when you had a baby and the hospital showed you some goddamn respect. So you got to like, you know, sit in the hospital and heal from this radical experience you've just had and this new life that you have to take care of. And guess what? When she packed up to go home, guess who wasn't going home?
Matthew was like, oh, I have a conference in Atlanta that I have to go to.
And she was like, you don't have to go to it because, you know.
Newborn baby and whatnot.
And she was like, I knew he wasn't going to a conference. He was going to his fucking mistress's house. And that, believe it or not, was
not the end of the marriage. I felt I had no choice but to go back and reclaim our home. I gave Matthew an ultimatum that if we didn't get intensive counseling, our marriage would be over. It was the only way I would go back to our house and to him. So they start counseling and she opens her salon. It's called Headliners.
And it is a huge success. She like hustled. She was hitting the ground. She's doing all the promo. And 3 months in, she's like, I just cannot have a little baby with me and be running this store. And I have to get out of my marriage. I have to have my own thing. So she drops Solange off with the grandmother for 1 month so that she can work. And she's like, it was the hardest time of my life. But luckily, Solange still loves her. So in addition to her bond with Solange, also she has a niece, Angie, who's the 10-year-old daughter of my brother, Larry. Angie's mother isn't close with Larry's side of the family because Larry's a bit sporadic in his showing up. And so she starts taking Angie in every summer too. And Tina has many a daughter and Angie is like another adopted daughter.
Yeah. I do feel like the way that Tina Knowles like sees children is so impressive. The way that she like picks out their little eccentricities, the way that she is obsessed with Angie's grades. And so she tells Angie, you have to send me your report card. So Angie starts going to the copy store to like Xerox and mail a copy of her report card to her aunt is so cute. They gross $500,000 the first year at Headliners. It's so successful. And then they buy a really lovely new house. There's this street that is like the desirable street. And they actually can't find a house on that street, but they get a house one street over on Parkwood Drive. A 5,000 square foot white brick dream home with a little apartment in the back for my niece, Denise, and her daughter, Ebony.
So Beyonce's at school and she's having a hard time getting bullied by other girls. And Tina's worried because she doesn't want to be like her own mother and not support Beyonce, but she's also like, you need to learn lessons in life and how to handle the haters. How right she was.
How right she
was.
And
so she has this funny thing where she has this little fur jacket, this little rabbit fur jacket that she wears to first grade, which is so silly and cute. But the other girls like make fun of her and they're like, that's ugly and we hate it. And Tina goes, okay, if you're not going to wear it to school anymore because the other girls hate it, why don't you put it in a bag and offer it to them? Say that they can have it since you're not going to wear it anymore. Beyonce comes home and is like, oh, the girls were fighting over it. And she goes, exactly. When they said it was ugly and they hated it, they were just jealous of what you had.
They wanted it.
That's an important lesson to learn. She also has this funny thing about Beyonce where she's like, Beyonce, you have to share with the other girls, like her other sisters, Angie, Ebony, like eventually Kelly Rowland when she moves in. And she says Beyonce doesn't like to share, but she'll just go, she could just have it. And she's like, Beyonce's like that to this day. She won't share anything, but she'll give you the shirt off her back. And I'm like, that is such a funny way to be. You can't borrow it, but you can have it.
This is something I didn't know about until you mentioned it when we were a little bit into this book. Apparently, there's like a joke in the Hive that like Solange is the favorite. Mm-hmm. And reading this book, I'm so curious about it because it definitely leaps off the page. And I wonder the way that Tina like sees all of these kids and their like dreams and their eccentricities and their everything. But like she just keeps calling Beyonce shy and like weird. And I wonder if it's because she's like overcompensating to make everyone else feel special. And she's like, well, Beyonce feels special enough. Every single person on the planet will consider her forever one of the greatest of all time. Or if this is like the vibe. Anyway, Beyonce's shy. Solange is a prodigy and Beyonce's shy.
I mean, she gives Beyonce so much credit. I mean, she is like so in awe of Beyonce. And obviously she like left Solange at home while she traveled the world with Beyonce as her stylist. I do wonder if when she looks at the two girls, she sees Beyonce as so like following in Matthew's footsteps. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I guess when your daughter's Beyonce, you don't have to like sugarcoat that she was bullied in kindergarten. If anything, that's like better. That's like better for the brand.
Yeah. So Denise and Ebony move out because Denise really wants to kind of establish herself on her own. And so now Beyonce doesn't really have an ally at school anymore.
So she sees like a dance performance and Solange really wants to do it. And she's like, well, maybe this will help them. Maybe this will like help them come into their own.
So they start going to these Wednesday night dance classes where this teacher is teaching at their school. And they're so good that Tina enrolls them at like the proper dance school as well. I mean, this seems pretty intense. They're going like, I think Wednesday nights and all day Saturday.
And very early on, the teacher is like, I have to tell you something, Beyonce can sing. And Tina's like, oh, I know, actually. I've known that. And she's like, no, you don't understand. She is like phenomenal. You have to get her into a talent show. There's a high school talent show coming up. And she's like, well, Beyonce's 7, so I don't think she should be going against high schoolers. And they're like, no, she should. They bring her to this talent show. She goes up there and they're like, the way that she came alive, she was like, as her parent, for the first time in my life, I could take a deep breath because I didn't need to stress because it was so clear that she got it. And afterwards, she's like, I just want to go home now. And they're like, well, we have to wait to see who wins. And she's like, well, I won. And they're like, sure enough, she did.
She's like, I'd like to go get some food. And they were like, well, we got to stay around. She goes, can I just get my trophy and dinner? And they were like, you're very talented. And then the dance teacher is like, you should enroll them in pageants. And Tina is like, oh no, I don't want to enroll them in a beauty contest. That feels really against everything that I've ever taught them. And the dance teacher is like, once you do the beauty portion once, you can just do the talent portion. Like once you've entered the beauty segment.
I guess beauty is fixed. However beautiful you are at 6 years old, you'll never get more beautiful than that. So score high,
I guess,
and then work on your personality.
Tina Knowles is one of the most impressive women in the world. I'll say that. I do think the way she overemphasizes that she did not purposefully, intentionally involve her children in like too much beauty competition feels a little like doth protest a lot. But she makes a really big point to be like, they did one beauty portion and then she would compete in the talent portion. And because she was the most talented, she won a lot of awards.
And agents would always come up and say, she's so great. We want to put her in modeling and acting and get her in commercials. And they're like, no, she's a singer. Modeling doesn't have anything to do with the future we envision for her.
Actually, this is so impressive. During her first pageant, she learned this little walk backstage. All the girls had been practicing it for months at that point because they'd all been in the pageant circuit for a while. She walks out there, does the walk perfectly, and then blows the judge a kiss. I mean, you can't teach that.
Meanwhile, Solange is very like competitive, I think, with her older sister. And she's like, well, throw me in, coach. Put me in the advanced dance class with Beyonce. And Tina's always like, well, you're a lot younger and, you know, it's going to be a lot of work. And Solange really raises to an occasion. She loves to meet the challenge head on. And everyone goes, damn, those Knowles girls. So ultimately, these two women see Beyoncé perform and they're like, we're trying to put together a girl group called Girls Time of Little Girls. We would love Beyoncé to be in it. At this point, girls group is like 100 ladies.
Yeah, I think there's like 12 of them. And eventually it becomes Beyoncé, Kelly Rowland, 2 dancer girls.
And then 2 rappers.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of them. But they're using Beyoncé essentially to write the harmonies and teach the choreography. She's like the natural leader of the group. And she's showing everybody how to harmonize and she's singing everyone's parts to teach them and she's helping them with the lessons. And by the end of it, her voice is so hoarse that she actually loses her spot as like the main girl. They bring in an older girl and she goes home and she complains to Tina and Tina's like, well, I'll get you vocal lessons to teach you how to use your voice so you don't get hoarse. Beyoncé does not like a vocal lesson. So she loses her spot. And when she comes to complain to Tina, she goes, well, I got you the vocal lessons. It's not about the other girls. It's not about saying you're better than her. It's about like being your own competition. And if you want to get better, you have to beat yourself. So Beyoncé, of course, goes back, works harder, and then earns her spot back. And Tina's like, at first I was worried I was being like my own mom and not supporting her. But now Beyoncé goes, you were right.
Now Beyoncé is Beyoncé. So it worked.
It's so funny to be Beyoncé. It's such a metaphor.
Meanwhile, Johnny loses his partner to cancer, and it's very hard on all of them.
Tina knows he'll never take like charity or a handout, but she's worried about him alone in Galveston without his husband. So she says, well, why don't you come help me out? Because, you know, between the salon and girls' time and being a mom and everything I've got going on, I could really use your help around the house, cooking and cleaning and taking care of the girls. So for the next year, Johnny lives with them kind of as like the full-time wife. And like, talk about community. What a dream. And she's like, it was just like the most beautiful time in my life because Johnny got so close with the girls. And I would come home and they'd be singing and dancing. And it was just like so wonderful to have all the people that I love together.
So Matthew is extremely invested in Girls' Time. He becomes like the co-manager of sorts. He's really like in the weeds with the contracts and the practices and just like really making sure everything's running.
And Kelly Rowland is a little girl who goes to school with one of the Girls' Time girls. And she's just like the sweetest little girl with this amazing voice. She gets dropped off one day and everybody hits it off with her and they just love Kelly. Kelly, however, has a single mom named Doris who has some struggles and they don't have consistent housing. So eventually to help out, Tina's like, hey, Doris, would it be helpful if Kelly just stayed with us for a while? And that's kind of the story of how Kelly became Beyonce's sister and Tina's new daughter.
Yeah.
At one point, she was even calling Matthew Knowles dad because she had never known her own biological father. And Beyonce's like, that's too far. But Tina's like, look.
Let her.
Yeah. And when Solange was born, it didn't make your dad any less your dad. You can share the wealth.
Okay, so the girls get on Star Search, which you've heard the audio of if you've ever listened to a Beyoncé song. The hip hop rapping Girls' Time. So they go on Star Search, they lose, but like things are happening for Girls' Time. Matthew wanted them to sing a different song on Star Search. They ended up going with the other song. And because they lost on Star Search, he sees it as a sign that like he needs to be more involved on an official level because he doesn't want to get outvoted again on something so important. So he leaves his job and starts helping out also at the salon, but Tina hates having him help out at the salon. He's like, what you got to do is cut costs and improve the margins. And she's like, no, I want to have high quality stuff. I don't want to put cheap shampoo in people's hair. So then he goes to focus mainly on the girls and the dancers end up leaving, Nikki and Nina. So then the band is Beyoncé, Kelly, Latavia, and LaToya.
Meanwhile, Solange is at home, and what she desperately craves is like a stable, normal, middle-class upbringing. At one point, they get a Jaguar, and she's like, I wish we had a Toyota Camry. And Tina's like, who the fuck even told you about a Toyota Camry? What kind of kid wishes for that? And she's like, it's really interesting. What Solange wants is like a family that gets together every night at 6 p.m. and has dinner. And she gets really frustrated because Tina's always doing like mental health days where they get to skip school and go to the beach. And Solange just like wants to do her homework and be tucked in and have everybody home following the rules.
She's like, you can't take me out of school. I've got lessons.
And she's worried about the girls creating a dynamic. She's like, is very aware that Beyonce is being bred to be the star and she doesn't want Solange to feel inferior or left out. So she sends them both to therapy. Beyonce does not like therapy because she doesn't like to talk. She's shy.
So shy.
Meanwhile, Solange loves it. She's like, an hour to chat. Sign me up.
But then her therapist dies from AIDS, and it is extremely traumatic for her. It's her first like major loss. It's like her first time experiencing grief. And for it to be your therapist, there's no one to help you with the grief. So then the girls get the opportunity to record an album, Girls Time, and they go to Atlanta for the summer. Latavia's mom, Cheryl, goes to chaperone them. They become friends with like TLC. They're having a great time. And then Tina is out there for the weekend and she is like very protective. She's like, they can't go to these parties where people are drinking.
You're not allowed to curse around them. You're not allowed to smoke around them. When she finds out that they had been kind of like smoking and cursing around the girls, she pulls them. And they're like, fine, then you're cut from the entire industry and you're the reason these girls will never make it. And she feels guilty about this for the rest of her life. She's like, you would think what with all of the success they end up having, I would have forgiven myself. And she's like, I didn't until recently I found out that the reason they got cut was because that guy lost his record deal. And he used my complaining as an out to make it look like it wasn't his fault, it was mine.
Yeah. I can't believe how much she carried that guilt with her.
I'm like, I think it all ended up okay. Yeah, I think you were right. I think they were better off becoming Beyonce.
By the time Destiny's Child was like 17 and headlining the MTV Summer Tour, maybe you could have forgiven yourself.
And they like grew up healthy. So at the same time, her and Johnny have a falling out because he starts dating somebody and Tina doesn't really approve of him. And Johnny ends up picking the boyfriend over Tina. So he's still close with the girls, but she unfortunately like loses that close friendship.
Mm-hmm. Solange is in school and she has a really racist teacher. She's determined to not be like her mom. She goes into that school over and over again to stand up for Solange and really keeps her foot on the neck of that bitch.
So one of the things that Matthew had started with Tina when he tried to come help with her hair salon was this hair magazine that focused and like supported Black hairstyles and Black stylists and stuff. And it became quite the hit. But unfortunately, the logistics of having a magazine like this was quite expensive. The shipping and the delivery of it all and like just setting up the booth. You know, she's like, the magazine itself was a success, but the business around it, we couldn't get to make sense. So they were going to cancel the magazine and Matthew goes behind her back and uses all of their money to print up these half-price copies that he was going to sell at full price. But unfortunately, because he had skimped so hard on quality, they sucked dick.
I mean, all the colors were bleeding. They had like beautiful photography that looked like muddled trash.
So they had been hit with a huge tax bill that they could not afford. So they had to declare bankruptcy or sell their house. They sold their house and moved somewhere cheaper. They had $60,000 left. Matthew had taken a lot of that money and spent it on this next round of magazines that he was sure was going to make it for them. He's a big, like, when you're at the bottom, dig deeper in order to spring up higher. And sometimes it works. But I think when you're a mother of like 6 people that you support and it's your money this time, you're like, you have to fucking at least ask my permission.
This is also a huge pattern with him to spend a fuck ton of money without asking anybody. Like the first time he ever bought them a nice car,
yeah,
she had no say in it. He just showed up with this car and she was like, okay, what the fuck?
And I think now that she's like, it's my business that you came in, you quit your job, and now you're taking my money and taking risks when we have so many mouths to feed and so many people we're responsible for, and we're already in this like terrible predicament. So she was like, that's it, I have to leave.
So he goes out of town for the weekend and she goes to look for an apartment. She has like 2 hours between appointments and she finds one in the school district she wants the kids to be in.
Yeah, so she goes and she has this 2-bedroom apartment and she moves her, Solange, Beyonce, and Kelly in. And she says Beyonce and Kelly share one room and her and Solange share the other.
And when she's talking to Solange and Beyonce as she's writing this book, they both remember this apartment as just like a shabby, nasty 1-bedroom that sucked.
And she's like, of course, I didn't realize then that it was so much more than just being about the apartment and giving up the big house with the pool. It was about one day they came home and she was like, your father and I don't live together anymore and we're moving out.
And she also didn't want to be bad-mouthing him, so she didn't really tell them that he was
cheating,
disrespectful,
and spending all their money and like really getting them into a problem. Of course, however, as is his way, he comes over for Christmas. After a few months, she kind of cools off. He sweet talks her again. He's quite a salesman, it seems. He does like love those daughters and fights for them. And it seems like when he's good, he's great. And when he's bad, he's horrid.
And the daughters, because they don't talk bad about each other and because she's shielded them from a lot of the problems, they are sitting there being like, why did you leave our great dad? And so she's getting pressure from every angle to get back together with him. And so eventually she relents.
After like 6 months, he moves back in with her and then money picks up and they buy a new house. He is also trying to get them a record deal. And finally, Teresa LaBarbera White signs them to Columbia, which is, I think she's the same woman who discovered Jessica Simpson. I'm like, I know that name.
Wow.
Which makes sense because she's the rep for Texas.
Yeah. So Kelly and Beyonce had been having a not great time at school. They're not popular. And one of the teachers was giving Kelly a really hard time about her like not getting a good grade in biology because she was spending too much time singing. And Matthew, once they signed this record deal with Columbia, marches into Kelly's classroom, yells at her teacher, and says she's never coming back here. And she never does go back. But I was like, Jesus fucking Christ, Matthew.
So she says, how did they get the name Destiny's Child? They picked it from the Bible. Tina saw the name Destiny in the Bible and said, you should be Destiny. It turns out there was already a gospel group named Destiny. So Matthew goes, what about Child? Destiny's Child.
Meanwhile, Johnny has gotten very sick. And so she reconciles with him because it doesn't seem like he has very much time left.
No. Part 2 with Wyclef Jean becomes a huge hit. The thing about having your dad as your manager and having like a great businessman as your manager is he was like instilling in these women from a young age, I guess they're just girls at this point, teens, how to not get fucked over by the music business. He will not, over his dead body, will these girls be victims of the music industry. So he's explaining to them that like when you get an advance and when you're spending money on your album and your music video and your hotel rooms, that's not free money. That's money you have to pay. So he teaches them to be very frugal. And at the end of the first year, they all get $85,000. They've had a #1 hit. They all want to go out and buy a car, but Tina goes, it's important to tithe. So why don't you give money to the church to let them buy vans? And then whatever you have left over, you can buy a used car. And they do. But look, serves them well. It did all come back to them in tenfold.
Boy, oh boy, did that work out.
I guess the thing there really is like, if you get a lump sum like that, you shouldn't spend it all because either there's more coming so you can do it bigger and better next time, or there's not more coming, in which case you need to save.
Okay, this story is so funny. The girls find out Solange is being bullied at school by this stupid boy. They walk into her school. They corner this guy. They all surround him. At this point, Destiny's Child is the 4 girls. They say, like, you better stay away from Solange. And then Beyonce hisses, Destiny Child has warned you. I guess she's not so shy anymore.
She says that became a real inside joke with them, that whenever somebody pissed them off, they go, Destiny's Child has warned you.
Tina is doing their hair, and Beyonce wants blonde highlights or something, and so she brings blonde extensions, but she doesn't bring enough, and her hair looks stupid, so she just starts cutting the blonde highlights out of her own hair to clip into Beyonce's hair.
So Beyonce from a young age has like such a specific vision, and of course like only Tina's really listening to them because they have a stylist from Columbia, but because of like they're new young girls and there's 4 of them, and because of like racism in the fashion industry and in the music industry, nobody's really serving them the way that Tina will serve them. So Tina comes on and is doing not only their hair, but their styling and making all their clothes from scratch, more or less. But the problem is, it's like no matter how resourceful they are, they only really get penalized for it. So when they find out that Tina's doing styling and hair, they get even littler of a budget because they're like, well, it's just your mom doing it. Why would you need more money?
Yeah.
But I have to say, Tina, she invented those looks and I guess she had the last laugh. And she's like, I would do things for them and then see it on the fashion runways the next year.
Yeah, I mean, when she talks about some of these things, so they did this show in the Bahamas, I think, and it had no wardrobe for it. Something like didn't get delivered on time. Something got messed up. So she drives around and finds this like local stall that has some camo gear and like fashions these incredible little outfits for them. And it became so iconic.
When I tried working with designers, the reality was that many did not want to give their clothes to these curvy Black girls. And even if I did work out a deal with a designer to do the wardrobe for an appearance or shoot, I needed 4 equal distinct looks. And that was always a problem.
She also ends up giving headliners to her assistant because she's just not there.
Solange refuses to go on the road with them. She's at home. She's living with a family friend of theirs, a friend family. The whole family's a friend. But she's like, I can't be with you. I have school. It's like a real problem between her and Tina because Solange, I think, feels hurt that she's been denied like a steady, normal life.
Mm-hmm.
And so Tina will like fly back in to see her and like want to take her out for lunch. And Solange will be like, I have plans. You can't just show up like this. I have a whole life that I live every day. And you can't expect me to just disrupt everything every time you pop by.
And it ends up becoming a pattern where Solange is extremely independent and has a real tendency to just kind of disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it is very based on this inconsistency that was modeled by other people.
Johnny, her cousin and best friend, who she is not very close to at this point, it does turn out he has AIDS-related dementia. And so she reaches out to him and makes amends. And they're able to have like a final year together. However, he's getting sicker and sicker. And she says like a lot of Renaissance was an ode to him. And that going to Renaissance was such a healing time for her because there were so many people in the crowd that like reminded her of the drag shows and the discos and like all the fun she had with Johnny.
Yeah, and there's some lyrics on the album about him. Hearing like a whole stadium of people sing about him is really healing for her.
She also shouts out Candy Burris and Shakespeare.
I was like, Shakespeare. Oh, yeah, Shakespeare.
Who are like producer-songwriters. And they like were the first ones to really allow Beyonce to get in the room and start producing. And at first, Tina was like, is she getting taken advantage of again? Because, that time when she was 8, when she was teaching everybody their harmonies. But she's like, oh no, these women are giving her a masterclass in how to be incredible producers. She can already write, she can already arrange. And now she's like learning the next ropes. And that's when they came up with Bills, Bills, Bills and Bugaboo.
But then LaToya and Latavia leave the group. There's not much about that in here.
We're going to do research and talk about it on the Patreon because I am like, what the hell happened? Why would you come out with no, and then like
leave?
Or were they left?
And so then they're looking for a new girl. They're traveling to all these art centers around the country, auditioning people. Tina and Beyonce love this girl named Michelle Williams.
She's a gospel singer from Chicago. She doesn't really have the look that the industry wanted. She was like a sweet church girl. And so they like fly her in of their own money and
give her a whole makeover. They practice with her. So Beyonce and Kelly are practicing with Michelle. They're harmonizing so naturally. And they're like, okay, we've got this down. So then when she comes into audition, she nails it because she's already had a little bit of practice with them. They also bring in a fourth girl who I think lasts like a minute. But anyway, Destiny's Child becomes Michelle, Kelly, and Beyonce.
The Writings on the Wall, that's their first album name, also picked from the Bible. After it's doing really, really well, they call in Matthew and they say, we have a problem. And it's Tina.
Yeah, they say Tina's styling is going to hold these girls back. And Matthew is like, no, it's not.
He does this thing where he goes into a meeting, turns off the lights, sits in the dark for a few seconds, then turns it back on and goes, Destiny's Child is keeping the fucking lights on in here. Just don't forget that.
So then they start.
I mean, that's why having a dad or a momager, like, that's how you,
I guess
it's kind of necessary.
Also, one of the things I was thinking of is the way that Tina did have such a like passion for music. She wanted to be a musician. She had such an eye for design. Obviously, we joke about all of the parents who like haven't fulfilled their dreams and they put all of their hopes into their child. But I do think that that's what it takes to have a star because it's not just having the talent
it's having
and the drive.
team.
It's having people around you who like have an inkling of how this goes, who've like put the thought into it for their own entire lives, who are now able to like make those dreams rise through you. Unfortunately, that's what it takes.
So they go on a huge tour where they're opening up for Jessica Simpson. This is where Solange and Ashley Simpson become friends.
They also are working on another album where they're going to be putting a lot of pop songs on an R&B album. And the label is like, you sound insane. You can't mix pop and R&B.
They're like, you'll never cross over. Reading this book, I really am like, has a music label ever been right about something?
Listen.
Have you ever heard of a story where a music label is like, we think you should make this choice and they've been dead right?
The stories that we've read in these books about record executives, I'm just like, I swear to fucking God.
I guess like the music industry was the original movie industry and that you're like, okay, there's all these creatives and these artists and there's millions of people out here with talent and drive who are desperate to create their art. And then there's this industry of people whose entire job is to stop you and make it worse. And for some reason, they're billionaires. And when you're right, they're right. And when you're wrong, they were right.
I can't believe that all of the good music that exists in the world was created in spite of the entire industry around it.
I feel like, okay, whenever I like am watching the Super Bowl or a sporting thing, I always do this thing where I like bet on the team I don't want to win. So that I'm like, okay, either way, I'm hedging my bets. Either I'm like happy or I'm up, right?
Happy or rich.
Yeah. And I feel like the music industry does the same thing where no matter what you've come to them with, they go, this sucks. You're wrong. That way, if it bombs, they can be like, told you. But if it doesn't bomb, they'll still pocket the money. It's not like they lose money by letting you succeed.
I mean, you know my theory about like all of these suits who work in creative industries where they think their job is to have notes. Mm-hmm. So even when there's no reasonable thing for them to say, they think they're not showing up that day if they're not like giving a genius their 2 cents.
They also like have no sense of what could work that hasn't worked yet. And unfortunately, the definition of like successful new contemporary art is art that's different than what's already worked. Because what's already worked becomes tired.
Exactly.
And it's so weird that they're like, but we haven't heard something like this before. And I'm like, exactly. That's kind of the good part.
Yeah. Anyway, so they mix some pop and R&B, and you'll never guess what happens. Destiny's Child becomes a global sensation.
And Tina ends up winning a Vogue Seal of Approval. She is recognized by the VH1 Vogue Fashion Awards. And finally, people are like, oh, I guess she's really important. And of course.
Of course.
And now Columbia was done messing with me for good. They had to move, obviously, in Houston because the fans get crazy and they needed to move into a gated house. That new home was the start of a good time for Matthew and me.
They're home and hanging out with Solange, and she just comes into the kitchen one day and was like, oh, I've been like making music and I'd like a record deal.
And they're like, well, you're not ready. And then she's like, I actually already called Pharrell. And they're like, who gave you Pharrell's number? She's like, Beyonce. And they're like, and who's paying for that? She's like, I don't know. And they're like, that's so Solange. I'm like, that's so true.
That's so true. But anyway, so they're like, we're not going to get you a record deal until you prove that you can handle the rigmarole of the music industry. So you have to be a backup dancer on tour for Destiny's Child to like show that you can show up for rehearsals, that you can show up on time for shows. They really are like, she's not going to like this once she sees the reality of it. And so she does it. She spends the summer on tour and she knocks it out of the park. And they go, okay, I guess we'll sign you up for record deal.
2001, Beyonce's on the cover of Vanity Fair. And there she meets Jay-Z and develops a little friendship with him.
She's also talking to this other guy. And at one point, the guy and Jay-Z are both going to be in LA where she's filming Austin Powers. She's like, I don't know which one I should date. And her mom is like, well, which one do you like talking to? And she's like, Jay-Z.
She starts to realize that she has this like fierce mama bear protectiveness in her. And she's helping her daughter stand up to the labels. And she's helping other people on shoes. Like she's like standing up for all celebrities. And she realizes she has a hard time standing up for herself. And it's because she's like becoming the face more of the style behind Destiny's Child and Beyonce. She herself is a brand. And she's like feeling uncomfortable on camera. Oprah Winfrey really helps her come out of her shell.
Her what?
Her shale. They also are starting to realize that they're now entering a level of Beyonce fame that's going to like not just change Beyonce's life, but everybody's life in the sense that they can no longer live a normal life. Beyonce can't go to the mall. Beyonce can't leave her house. If they are with Beyonce, they are stuck inside.
Destiny's Child goes on hiatus. Michelle and Kelly both put out projects. Dilemma, that is such a good song. So then Beyonce is getting ready to put out her debut album, her debut solo album, Dangerously in Love. And the record label is like, this album sucks. It has no singles. It has no hits. It has Crazy in Love, Baby Boy, Naughty Girl, Me, Myself, and I, The Closer I Get to You. So they end up putting Jay-Z on Crazy in Love to like have it a little bit more appeal for the record label.
Because she knows, she goes, they're not going to talk to Jay-Z like this. And Jay-Z's like, this is a hit. They talk together as artists and he sees her genius and she sees his. And so she's like, will you help me out here?
So they go back to the label with the new version. They're like, okay, well, this song is good. And they're like, put out the fucking album.
They go, you can do it, but don't come crying to us when it sucks. And as she later said, they were kind of right. The album didn't have one single. It had 5.
Stupid record labels. You guys are so dumb.
Meanwhile, Solange is going out on her own, trying to do her own solo album.
She has such a vision for what she wants to create. She needs a horse. And they're like, okay, we can like do something really quick in Central Park. They do kind of like a rogue shoot. It ends up being gorgeous. But every time she goes out to promote it, they only want to talk about Beyonce. And she's very frustrated by being in Beyonce's shadow.
So she decides just to move back to Houston and live a normal teen life. She doesn't want to do it anymore. However, while she's there, she's having fun. She is like has friends. She's living a normal life. One day she's out at a game at the local stadium. What is it? Astro?
Well, she ends up not going to the stadium. So she takes her like cousins or someone to a concert, and she was supposed to go to a football game with her best friend. And her best friend at the local game is like in the vicinity of a shooting and ends up getting shot.
Yeah, just like a stray bullet because she happened to be walking by and dies. And now Solange is in like a deep grief and depression. And she says it also really changed Solange in the sense that Solange has this idea of like she has to do everything right now because
I mean, she's lost her therapist that she was close with, her Uncle Johnny, who was like her parent for a long time, and then now her best friend.
And she has this idea that like life could be cut short at any point, so you have to get going.
So she decides she really just wants to like live and like have a family.
So they're on their way to the Grammys, 2004, and Solange is like, by the way, you've been a really great mom. It's not your fault, but I'm pregnant and I'm getting married. They beg her not to get married. They go, please. And she insists. So they do everything they can to throw a wedding for her. Luckily, on short notice, they're able to get to John Travolta's private island. And
thank goodness.
It's so funny. The wedding's on John Travolta's private island, and they fly their whole family out there for the day. And she's getting her wedding dress at David's Bridal. She feels just like random.
So random. So her now husband, I think she's 17 or 18 years old. He's like on a sports team at the University of Idaho.
So they move out to Moscow, Idaho, and Solange is 17 with a baby on her own. Meanwhile, things are really bad between her and Matthew again. Matthew sells their family's management company. They split it evenly. They split up. They end up getting back together. Tina doesn't want to be with him, but she doesn't know how to be on her own. And Matthew won't let her go. So it's just, that's their pattern. Just this horrible thing happened to her where she like gets hot oil while she's cooking all over her legs and she's like singed into her jeans. And so she has spent a whole summer getting like major skin grafts and surgeries and stuff. And it sounds fucking brutal. She talks about the hose they use on you to get off all the dead skin and stuff and how you just like scream in pain. So that was a terrible thing that was happening to her. But she says, Matthew was an amazing advocate for her at the hospital. And she's like, it's hard because when he's defending you or defending your daughter who you love so much, like you fall in love with him. I guess the thing is like at his best, he's great. At his worst, he's not the worst. At his worst, he's bad enough to divorce, but then he's so good.
Anyway, so she goes to visit Solange in Idaho. She has a baby now and she's just like making incredible art. She just has time to herself to think. She doesn't really know anyone in Idaho and it's so cold and sucks. So she's just like an incredible artist now.
They end up getting a divorce very soon after. Like right away, they start having fights about whether or not she's allowed to have a nanny, etc. So it doesn't work out and she ends up coming back to Houston and LA. I want to say this to Solange. Your LA apartment that was in Architectural Digest is one of the most important spreads I've ever seen. You have this custom pink couch that I think for 6 years now has haunted me. And
That's
I saw
Solange's couch?
Yeah.
The one that you always talk about?
Yeah.
Okay. Claire talks about this couch like we know her.
I know her because I see her and I think about her. She sold that apartment recently and I was like, oh, what's happening with the couch? It's so good.
So then one day an interviewer is like, oh, Miss Tina, when are you and Beyoncé coming out with a clothing line? And she's like, oh, soon. It's in the works. And so then they're like, oh, we got to get a clothing line in the works. That's a really good idea.
Who's her co-creative director for House of Darion? Heather Thompson of Housewives fame.
Oh,
that's that lady. Holla.
Oh my God.
You watched that a little bit of that season, right? With Carol Radswell?
Yeah.
That's
How
fair.
fun.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty high-end brand and people were a little afraid to like take a chance on a very expensive celebrity brand. So they created a junior label that was hugely successful. We don't need to get too much into House of Darion, but
she ended up selling it for $100 million.
It did pretty well.
Beyoncé marries Jay-Z. Tina does the dress. She doesn't tell too many details, but I guess they got married in their own apartment and the two mothers did all the cooking. And I think that's really cute.
Yeah, they're all like really happy as a family. Beyoncé and Jay-Z's parents.
Suddenly, Beyoncé is very upset because she's like, I don't know how to do anything. I don't know how to like book a hotel room. I don't even have an office. And her mom's like, well, why would you need an office? And she's like, for my business. And it's so funny because there's this whole thing about how like Beyoncé
wants to do stuff for herself.
And so Tina's like, I went out the very next day and I set up an office for her. And I was like, oh, solving the problem of Beyoncé learning to do things for herself. Listen, why would she buy her own office supplies? She's Beyoncé and she has bigger things to think about.
It's also like Tina does emphasize like how good of a leader she is. Like she's not a good setter-upper, but she is.
She's the CEO.
She's so good at CEOing.
She's not a businessman. She's a businessman. Let her handle her business. Damn.
So they're all happy. Everything's going great. Beyoncé, I think, is Woman of the Year. And Tina's leaving the luncheon. And everyone's like, oh, how are you feeling about the news? And she's like, the news that my daughter is the Woman of the Year? I feel great about it. And they go, no, the news that your husband's been served with paternity papers from one of his affairs.
In this very building. They served him during this event. So she looks like a goof because they're like, what do you have to say about what just happened? And she's like, nothing but pride. She obviously is so humiliated. She almost can't take it.
And she finally leaves him. She says, get out. I hate you.
They're about to go on the Beyoncé's I Am tour. And she goes, don't you dare show up on this tour. And if you do, I will humiliate you. Of course he does show up. And he's like banging on her room all night. She won't let him in.
And they file for divorce. She finally does it. She fully is like going through the process of exiting that marriage. And I said, finally, Tina.
At the same time, Beyoncé has cut ties with him as her manager. So he's back in Houston licking his wounds. And I was like, thank God. Because I think there's more to the story than we've even been told.
I mean, all we've been told is like no, she didn't say light infidelity.
She said nonstop
hella
in the hospital
infidelity.
having your baby infidelity.
Yeah, okay, but she mostly only says infidelity. That's like the number one thing she sticks to.
She's filed for divorce. She's on this amazing tour. And then suddenly she finds a man who makes her feel a little bit better. Someone improbably steady presented himself for me to hold on to in my disorientation. The last man I expected.
So she's having a secret affair.
She's like booking her own flight. She's going back to Galveston. She's having fun.
She's meeting this man at her beach house every weekend to have like a sexy romp.
I'd promised to be there in time to watch the sunset together. And there he was waiting for me at the house.
Matthew. I almost flung my book to space.
I was in the laundromat.
I said, Katy Perry, take this and drop it out the window when you get up there.
I said, Jesus fucking Christ. And let me tell you, in my neighborhood, you do not take the Lord's name in vain. But I said, you guys, if you read what I just read, you would feel the same way.
Having an affair with my estranged husband was the last thing I expected after I filed for divorce in November. For 3 months, we didn't speak. But in New York City, he came to my apartment and laid his heart bare.
He's back in counseling and suddenly he's fixed. She goes, he really did seem different this time.
Oh my God, look, I wrote no when Matthew comes back. When Beyoncé was born, she was like, our marriage was disintegrating rapidly. And now it's like 25 years later.
Well, what's making me laugh is that since she has originally left Matthew, she has like had a daughter and that daughter has gone on to get a divorce.
I mean, the whole point of opening Headliners is that so she could have a business.
Yeah.
Like, so she could have money of her own. And that business became so successful and she had so much money of her own. And then she like let Matthew spend it. I know we don't get a lot of information about Beyonce and Jay-Z's relationship from anybody, from Beyonce, from Tina, from whatever. I wonder how much like living in this dynamic where your mom is like kind of leaving your dad for cheating every couple years. And then going back because the bond is too strong and they're too in love.
Well, even Tina says, looking at her parents' relationship, she goes, the definition of marriage is like putting up with it.
Obviously, I'm glad we have Lemonade, but I'm like, Beyonce, do you want to go?
Mm-hmm.
You're allowed.
I think something that this book really told me about fame. I mean, I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I think you guys know how it ends.
Beyonce is very successful.
Yeah, it ends.
And so is Solange. And so is Tina.
There's like a moment where Tina's like with all of her family out at the Hamptons. And I do think something that happens when you become very famous is your ability to have like real life friends dissipates. And so all you have is your family. So if you don't have a good family and then you get that famous, you're so fucked.
Yeah.
And I think you look at like who's been able to maintain it for like long stretches of time. It's Taylor Swift, it's the Kardashians, it's like Beyonce. But it's like because you get to this point where the only people you can let in are the people that you've known the whole time. Otherwise, it's just like nothing's trustworthy. And so if you are on your own, it's really hard to be a global superstar.
Yeah. I guess that's the other thing is I'm like, Beyonce, if you want to leave, you're allowed. But also like, who would she date?
Yeah. Like, where do you go from there? So anyway, so she's having this affair with Matthew. They're not telling the girls because they know the girls would be pissed. Publicly, they have filed for divorce.
They have a divorce hearing scheduled.
The girls show up on Mother's Day to surprise her in Galveston. And of course, they find out that Matthew's been there too. They're pissed. She's like, this isn't your life. You mind your own business.
Because now, 15 years after the first time she's like officially moved out when the girls were old enough to understand what was going on. The first time they had been very like, how dare you leave our dad? Now they're like, how dare you stay with this man who's cheating on you so much? We don't want you to.
Also, like the public humiliation that he's put their whole family through. This is headline news that he was served a paternity test.
And is the dad.
Eventually, she calls her therapist and was like, I need an intervention. She leaves Matthew. This time, spoiler alert, for good. Her therapist like moves in with her for a long weekend and just does like spiritual healing on her for 3 straight days. And then she takes a few months and is really just depressed.
Yeah.
And her therapist finally says, you need to write down all of your insecurities, all of your failures, all your flaws. And then on the other column, write down everything you've accomplished and everything good about you. And it really helps boost your confidence. And then she's like crying, but she's got all these daughters. She's got Beyoncé, Solange, Angie, Kelly, and they all come and help her. And she really has this moment of being like, oh, I have to walk the walk. I want to be a role model for these young women, but look at me not be able to believe in myself, not be able to like think I'm worthy, not be able to even take a compliment. I have to start like working on my own empowerment if I'm going to convince these women that they're empowered too.
Yeah, she says I've been telling them all their lives how special they are and like not modeling confidence in the way that I think I am. She also finalizes the divorce without even telling Matthew. She's like waiting for him to hear about it. And finally she calls him and is like, by the way, we are divorced.
And I guess things were really bad. I also want to look into what was going on between Beyonce and her dad, if it was more than just the paternity thing or if it had been rocky for a while. Because when Blue Ivy is born after the many miscarriages, which was really, really hard for, of course, Beyonce and then anyone who loved Beyonce, Tina's the one that said, Beyonce, can your father come meet the baby? And I'm like, how bad was it that it wasn't assumed that he'd get to meet the baby? Because it's one thing to be like, I don't want my dad to be my manager, but it's another thing to be like, I don't want my dad to be a grandpa.
Yeah.
That's intense. And I guess he slowly like whittles his way back into their life. And she's like, I was able to have him in my life cordially.
He's on the outskirts for a while.
But not get back together. But she's like, she's able to bring him back into the fold platonically. Then he gets married. And I think that kind of sets everybody back a bit. Tina's like, whoa. It's one thing to like not remarry your own husband. It's another thing to see your own husband get remarried.
Yeah. 2 days into being divorced, my little method, this thing I thought was resilience, would not take hold. She's having a really hard time with it at first.
Like her therapist is really helping her. She's doing EMDR. And through this experience, she realizes how much trauma and how much anger she had at her mother and how mad she was that her mom never supported her. And this feeling of being like, I was born into this role of caretaker and I never learned how to like prioritize myself because I wasn't ever allowed to. And I wasn't ever made to feel that I'm like worthy or good enough or allowed. And she's like, once I saw how mad I was and was able to articulate that, I was able to forgive her and then forgive myself. And now like we live at peace. She tells her daughter, she goes, look, I've done so much for you, but I think I need to be a bit selfish for a while.
And they're all like, yes,
get out of here. Go do you. Like, we don't want you to be serving us anymore. And she's like, I guess they never even asked me to do that, really. I made myself do it. They're like, go live your life, Tina. We're going to be okay.
So she's figuring out what she likes about herself. She's kind of going back to reconnect with friends that she's lost touch with as her daughters have become the most famous woman in the world.
So she's dating. It sucks. She like goes back to reconnect with this woman, Monica, who is clearly very hurt that she feels she was ditched by Tina. Tina's like, it's not that I thought I was too good for you. It's that I was too busy. Like I didn't have time for myself. I didn't have time for friends. And slowly Monica kind of warms up to her and she goes out and she meets Tina and Tina's like, no, it sucks. I'm traveling on this European tour.
I'm doing all the costumes
for Renaissance. And she goes, well, don't. Why do you have to be working? Why can't you go enjoy yourself? Like get your groove back.
Beyonce doesn't need her mom to be the stylist anymore to like get the outfits she wants. You could just be on tour and watch. And she's like, oh my God, it was so crazy. We spent the whole summer just like on tour, but during the day we'd go to museums and at night we would just watch the shows.
Yeah.
And it was the funnest summer. And then she's trying to date a little bit. Someone from House of Darion introduces her to this doctor. He's age appropriate. They have a great conversation, but like he's not fun. She's like, okay, it turns out old guys are not that fun.
But she doesn't want to date a young guy. She's like, I don't ever want to be a sugar mama, even if he has like a ton of money. I don't like that dynamic. She eventually gets reintroduced to her friend who's passed away, his older brother, Richard Lawson. Was he successful before her or was he just in LA as an actor?
I think he was successful.
Okay. They date. They end up getting married. Spoiler alert, after 10 years, they get divorced.
Yeah, she doesn't talk that much about their relationship. She says that they had an amazing friendship. It turned into a very solid love.
She's funny. She goes, I'm not going to say what went wrong, but I will say,
I deserve someone who loves and respects me and is there for me and makes me feel seen.
And is not jealous. I do think, I see it with women my age. It's really hard to find a man that doesn't feel insecure around another woman's success. I cannot imagine trying to find a man who's 70 years old that's okay with having a woman who is so successful and alpha and energetic and like she's got a lot going on.
Yeah, and she's so fun and cool and nice.
But I'm sure if you're like, oh, I thought we were going to be retired. What do you mean you're out there like building businesses and philanthropy? And I feel like that's got to be hard. It's got to be hard to find a man born in that era who's cool with it.
Yeah. And so now she doesn't want one. Now she's like, oh, okay, I'll only date if it's like fulfilling, but I'm not going to let anyone stamp me down. And I said, yes, Tina, exactly.
She's really
don't get stamped.
Focusing now on philanthropy. She's like, the thing I love most is giving young people an opportunity and a word of encouragement. And she's like, everything changed for me when I saw that Alvin Ailey performance when I was 14. And I really want to expose young children to the arts.
So she starts this thing called Tina's Angels, where she's going into underserved communities and introducing them to art.
Renaissance was a really good time. I believe that.
That seems true. Solange gets back into music. She starts working as an independent artist. And, we know how that shakes out. She creates some of the best albums of a generation.
a seat at the table, was hugely successful. She does an art installation at the Guggenheim. She does a lot and she does it her own way. And Tina's very in awe of her.
Yeah, Solange is very insistent that she's not like willing to have someone be like, oh, we're like inviting a Black person into this thing and it's just like for the day. She's like, no, until we're welcome in this space, until this is like our space too, you haven't done anything.
So she says, I thought this book was going to wrap out neatly with like women, matriarch, family, love. And unfortunately, in the summer of 2024, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. Luckily, when they finally went in and did the biopsy and the surgery, it was only stage 1. So they were able to get it out with surgery. And she now is like very happy with her new smaller breasts. And then she went on to win Glamour Women of the Year award. And then she's writing this book being like, how wonderful is life?
Her daughters have great families. She hangs out with them. They're always just dipping and diving in the pool.
The sun is setting in the darkening sky of autumn, my favorite hue of orange mixing with the gold and the thinning wisps of blue. I have lingered out on this balcony, watching the waves long enough, knowing I would finish the book today. The precious time of gathering memories is closing. It's not an end, I know, but my new beginning.
Claire, how many worm teenies would you want to have with Tina?
Oh my God, like 3?
I would want to have so many worm Tinas.
Can I say I would want to have as many as she had because I wouldn't want to be like messier. I guess however many she has -1 because I'm kind of a lightweight. Yeah. And I don't want to be like more drunk than her, but I would love to be drunk with her.
I don't want to be too drunk. I do want to go dancing after. I want to be exactly drunk enough that then we go dancing.
Mm-hmm.
And then how fertile would you consider this soil?
I cautiously want to say 4 out of 5.
I would say about 4.
It's one of those books that I'm scared that I'd be like, she really spilled a lot of tea. She really got into it. There's a lot in here and it's very vulnerable and honest. But then you have like a true Beehive fan be like, she left out this and this and this. You know what I mean? That's the problem with these books when you're not like super familiar with the lore is that you'll go, they told me so much. And then people are like, they didn't even address the true stuff. So cautiously, I'm saying 4.
I think for a Tina Knowles memoir.
I was expecting nothing. I thought this would be like a fucking tight ship.
Yeah. When you're reading a book and you're like, well, I think I know who you are now. Like, I think I get a gist of like, what's the vibe here? I think she's an incredible woman. I think she is so beautiful. And, obviously she raised really impressive kids. I think that in general, I'm like, I don't know how much of it was like the secrets.
Mm-hmm.
I get who you are.
Mm-hmm.
I get the vibe.
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
Mm-hmm. And Ashley, who are our little Beyoncés?
5 stars for the stars of my heart.